Hey guys, welcome to That Florida Feeling. Hope everybody's having a good week. I know it's still a hot one. It's been brutal, like especially South Florida right now. Gosh, between that and the standoff with the iguanas and the rain every day, I don't know, man. It's been a week, I tell you. And yes, I had a standoff with an iguana in a parking lot. They do not back down. They are creepy. I'm not going to say I like it better when they're frozen solid because that's mean, but I'm just saying I like it better when you don't realize they're there. Thank you to everybody who's interacting with the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok pages. As always, you guys are awesome. I love the memes, the videos, the pictures around Florida. Don't forget to tag me in them or use the hashtag #ThatFloridaFeeling so I can see what you guys are doing and share it with everybody else. This podcast may be by me, but it's not just about me. It's about Florida and all you guys living here or loving Florida, and if you don't live here. So just tag me in them so I can see what you're doing, what you love, and all that fun stuff. Also, don't forget to participate in the polls. I would say they're on Wednesdays, and usually I have the best intentions of them on Wednesdays. Sometimes they end up on Thursdays. I'm sorry about that, you guys. Life happens. I feel like you guys can relate to that. So today I want to talk about a new place in Florida because it's still summer. We're still exploring. I mean, we should always be exploring. It's Florida. It never gets super, super cold, and a lot of it, the Panhandle does its own thing. But, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I always like to explore new places. And so today I want to tell you about a place that I'm just apparently really late to discovering. Like, I don't know what happened. I don't know if I heard about it and overlooked it or what. But I have always heard about Big Cypress National Preserve, but I never really looked into going there. And when I finally did, gosh, you guys, it's amazing. It's insane, but it's amazing. So Big Cypress National Preserve is a U.S. preserve located in South Florida. It's maybe 45 miles west of Miami-ish, towards the Everglades. And the preserve was actually one of the first in the U.S., along with the Big Thicket National Preserve in Texas. And these were both established on October 11th in 1974. So this is one of the first. Now, Big Cypress is around 720,000 acres of land that border the Everglades. So it's not technically part of the Everglades, but it borders the Everglades, which is the same kind of land. So if you said Everglades, I could see exactly how, you would think it's the same thing. And of course, this is not a new area. Florida's not new, but this area has been home to humans for thousands of years. Evidence in the area actually shows that humans have been changing the land and using it to grow for thousands of years. And of course, that's how the first cultures really grow and adapted, was agriculture. Archaeological evidence near Platte Island shows evidence of human usage and or living there for over 2,000 years. So this is not new by any means. The Calusa were the first to explore and settle in the area, and the Europeans didn't really make it there until the 1500s. So Calusa were there first, and then here comes the Europeans. The Miccosukee, the Seminole, and eventually white settlers have all called this area home at some point. The swampland was historically home to the Calusa, which are the first people that they know to be there, and they had an extensive presence in the swamp for many, many years. And other Native American tribes also took over with the land, with the last being the Seminoles. So the Seminoles did live here, and some of them actually still do live near there. Of course, the rugged terrain, freshwater prairies, and wildlife have all proven challenging for anybody who's called the swampland home, but there have been many people who've conquered it. Now, the settlers that came into the area in the 1800s would often hunt egrets and herons for their feathers, as their feathers were more popular with hat for that time. So, the feather plumes you see in, historical photos? They might have actually been heron or egret feathers instead of some other large bird. You can't quite, what a peacock feather is, so you can't quite say that. But I guess I didn't realize that herons and egret feathers were something of a commodity back then, and that's what they were really using for the feather in your cap. Poachers also moved into the area for the American alligators and the American crocodiles. Poachers actually hunted these reptiles until they were almost extinct, which is why it's now legal to touch, feed, kill, anyway, encroach on an alligator. I actually have a fun story about that. I was fishing one time and I inadvertently caught a baby alligator because something bit on the thing, and it actually bit the bobber. So I'm pulling it out and I'm trying to get this thing off my fishing line before anybody sees it because the last thing I want is someone to think that I am fishing for alligators. But yeah, so due to these poachers, that's why alligators are a protected species. And I know some people are like, oh, there's so many of them. Well, you still can't touch them. Now, the industry in the area soon moved from hunting to timber, as they built railroads and they cut down trees to build buildings in the area. And they actually cut down most of the cypress ecosystem of the old growth trees, which means that they took some of the oldest trees off the land that had grown without interference. No humans had messed with them, only animals and nature had messed with these trees. They were old, they were beautiful, they were big, and they probably gave a little something extra to the ecosystem in the preserve because they had been there for so long and they were so big. And they provide homes and shelter and oxygen. But, of course, humans being humans, they cut down some of the oldest trees. People also farmed in Big Cypress, as some of the western lands were more elevated than others, which meant that it was fertile farmland because it had been sitting kind of near the swamps for so long. Now, the Big Cypress National Preserve did hold an interesting secret, and it held it until the early 1900s. Now, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, people had moved on kind of from gold to oil. Oil was now the thing. People were searching for oil all over the U.S., and eventually somebody got the idea to dig in Florida. The Humboldt Oil Company, which is now Exxon, discovered Florida's first oil-producing well on September 22nd, 1943, in the northwest portion of what is today Big Cypress National Preserve. And just to let you guys know, that was after they had already drilled 80 other holes. So it held its secret for a very long time. But it's really, really interesting to think that Florida produced oil, and it did so in the last 80 years. It's not like this has been for hundreds of years. They've been using Florida for oil. This was only done about 80 years ago. Now, the preserve was originally supposed to include the Everglades when it was established as a national preserve in 1947. But because the land had not been purchased by the U.S. and the Everglades still technically remained in a private ownership, it couldn't be in the park system. It was still for private use. And the land actually continued to be a point of contention for preservation. They knew that the Everglades were special. They knew that it had a great ecosystem and that they wanted to preserve it and that they didn't want people to encroach on it or build on it. Because it held the water supplies, it held animals, the ecosystems, everything. And so once they did the preserve, it kind of actually almost made it easier to get the Everglades. But the reason it was so much of a point of contention is because there was a part of the Everglades that was supposed to become the new Miami jetport or airport, which was going to be a massive new airport to replace the current Miami International Airport. And of course, when they went to build this jetport, there was a lot of contention. A lot of people didn't agree with it, especially the Native Americans, the hunters, and the conservationists. They knew that they were going to destroy land that didn't need to be used. The construction actually stopped in 1970, and out of 6 proposed runways, only 1 was completed. It was a single completed runway, and it is now known as the Dade Collier Training and Transition Airport. So, there is a single runway, and if you look it up on Google Maps, it's kind of interesting because it's literally just a strip of concrete. Just there it is. The conservationists who wanted to stop the airport construction are the same ones who campaigned to have Big Cypress included in the national park system. And of course, it was officially designated in 1974 as a national preserve, with a large difference from the Everglade National Park. One is a park, one is a preserve. And the reason being is that because, let's see, how do I put this? So Big Cypress actually gave permanent rights to the Miccosukee, Seminole, and traditional people who occupy to use the land in traditional ways. So they have the rights to develop income-basing property related to the resources of the land. They can use guided tours, they can do agriculture, they can hunt, and they can use certain off-road vehicles. Whereas in the Everglades, none of that is allowed. In the Big Cypress, homes and businesses have been permitted to keep their properties in the preserve that was there before it was created. Petroleum exploration was permitted in the preserve. It was also in the Everglades, but the government is actually to this day still trying to buy out those remaining leases so they can shut down any non-governmental commercial access to the preserve and the Everglades to keep the environment from further being damaged. So, like, no more oil drilling in Florida or in that part of Florida. And so that was really the difference between the Everglades National Park and Big Cypress National Preserve. The park is obviously a national park. It is in the national park system. There are things that you are not allowed to do in the Everglades, whereas in Big Cypress National Preserve, certain people have been granted rights because they have had use of the land, or they own part of the land, or it was there before the preserve came in. But it is cool that they did give first rights to the Native Americans, certain tribes. Now, the completion of the Tamiami Trail in 1928 helped provide access to the preserve, as it allowed for easy travel across the swamp for anyone who could afford a Model T at the time. So remember, when cars were first built, one, nobody knew how to drive them, and two, they were really, they're not expensive today, but back then that was a lot more money. So the road helped to start a major land boom in the area for South Florida, which caused development on the Atlantic Ridge to the east, so Miami, and then slowly on the west near the Gulf, so Naples. So you're talking about the area that preserve is in is right in between, like, the Miami corridor and, the Naples area. But good thing for this area, a lot of people didn't want to really attempt to conquer the swamplands like the people of the past, so a lot of it did remain untouched and wild, which is kind of actually how it was safe and able to be preserved so well. The preserve is in South Florida, so therefore it does have a tropical climate. And since it's in the middle of the state, there's a lot of days where it can reach close to 100 degrees. While in January it stays sometimes in the 70s. There are some brutally cold days, and I say brutally cold because if it hits 50 in South Florida, dear Lord, let me tell you, we're not prepared. And of course, the area, just like any other part of Florida, goes through dry and wet seasons, with the wet season bringing daily rains to the area in the forms of typical afternoon thunderstorms. Anytime between 1 and 3, you're probably going to get a storm, and then anything later in the day, which is kind of the beginning of the season that we're in right now. The preserve has a very diverse ecosystem, which includes cypress trees, dwarf ponds, and mangroves. The system is able to be home to many different flora, fauna, and animals. The preserve is also home to federally listed endangered species that include the western indigo snake and Florida's sandhill crane. So as you can see, that the preserve is very much protected for a reason. It is a beautiful area, and it is home to species that don't live anywhere else. And so you want to preserve those. You don't want to take away their home, because one, we know that when more construction brings animals to places they shouldn't be, such as seeing coyotes roaming or black bears roaming in the middle of Orlando. That's not normal. It's because you built on their land. But in the preserve, you can see more than just the snakes and the cranes. You can also see a variety of animals that actually travel through the preserve as well as live there. You can see anything from a Florida panther to a black bear, fox squirrels, and even manatees. Manatees can live in salt, fresh, or brackish water, so the preserve is actually an ideal place for them to flourish, especially since nobody's really messing with them. And of course, it's Florida, so you're going to see birds like wading birds such as herons or egrets. You'll even see anahingas, hawks, small kites, snail kites, purple martins, mockingbirds, warblers, and even woodpeckers. So if you're an avid bird watcher, you might want to go check it out. The preserve is, of course, home to alligators, Florida softshell turtles, water moccasins, crocodiles, and of course the Burmese pythons, which are a very invasive species. If you watched the news lately, you saw the guy that got like 113 eggs out of a Burmese python nest. That is just insane. And of course we know that was partially due to Hurricane Andrew. But it's crazy how they just reproduce so quickly and hide so well. Now, the park is also home to some very unique places such as Deep Lake. The lake is a 90-foot naturally occurring sinkhole that is the deepest lake south of Okeechobee and one of the deepest in the state. The lake has an unusual feature, as the top half is freshwater and the bottom half is saltwater. And the lake has been a gathering place for peoples and animals for a very long time. Seminole Chief Holada Miko and Billy Bowlegs, whichever you know him as, held this territory near the lake for a long time. The lake has fertile land surrounding it, and it was used for growing fruit trees and produce for agriculture. Billy and his family lived there peacefully through the Seminole Wars until his camp was destroyed, and this sole action, is what is thought to have caused the Third Seminole War. And of course, we'll talk about that in our podcast on the Third Seminole War eventually. The land and the lake were eventually purchased by Walter Langford and John Roach, who wanted to develop the land into a grapefruit business. They knew that this area was going to be good for citrus growth, which a lot of Florida land is good for citrus growth, so it just made sense that they should put into a business here, and they chose a grapefruit business. But it was a little bit tough for them at first. They had to make their own railroad into the area because getting supplies in the area with no infrastructure at all was actually very difficult, but they did it. And soon enough, Deep Lake grapefruit was being sold by the thousands. The business would eventually be bought out by Baron Collier. Yes, the same one that Collier County is named after. And he would continue the business as well as adding cottages and a hunting lodge to make it a place for people who would want to come and stay, and then even go on hunting expeditions in this area. So not only did he see the business, he grew it into a whole nother business. And you can actually still see parts of the retreat to this day. Of course, they are ruins, basically, but you still can see them, and it's cool to think that people used to go and to stay there. The property did eventually close in the early 1940s, and since 1974, it is officially part of the preserve. Now, the preserve has an amazing history beyond just the Native Americans and the grapefruits, but one man definitely helped the preserve and its history, and even captured the amazing beauty of South Florida. Sam Vinikoff was the Everglades artist. You may have heard of the Everglades artist. That is Sam Vinikoff. He would often paint in the preserve or the Everglades to showcase the beauty of the area. He was an avid painter, and for much of his life in South Florida, that was his inspiration. He would even work with park rangers to travel to the rugged areas of the park to capture the beauty of the swamplands and the animals that roamed through them. He would paint and then donate his pieces and allow those who couldn't make it to the preserve to still see it the way he saw it and to preserve the beauty of it. He continued to paint in the preserve until his death at 91 in 2010. You can actually still see his works in the visitor center. He also helped establish the Artist in Residency program in the preserves at the Everglades. The Artist in Residency program allows artists such as writers, composers, visual and performing artists to gain inspiration from this beautiful landscape. The residency is about 2 to 3 weeks in the dry season, so you're thinking November to April. And they stay in a dormitory-type setting where they can meet other artists and share inspiration from the lands. Currently, this is on hold, but I think that's a really cool ability to have an artist in residency, so that you can go and you can draw inspiration from nature. Because I know that, I podcast and I photograph, and you do really just go sit on the beach and you'll draw inspiration, or you'll think of a topic you want to talk about for the podcast, or you'll see some amazing sunrises and sunsets, and you'll get beautiful shots and just great pictures, and it just kind of brings you calming and inspiration, and it just makes your day kind of better. So I totally think that that's a great program that they have to allow people to just go into this setting that's been untouched and to just sit there and enjoy it, or dwell on it, or think about it. Now, the preserve also does have 12 campgrounds where you can stay overnight, bring in your off-roading vehicles. You can find campgrounds for RVs or tents, depending on your preference, how much you want to rough it or not rough it if you're like me. And the campgrounds either have outhouses or toilets, depending on which campsite you choose. They do all have fees, so be prepared to pay a little bit. And they do have some electrical hookups for the RVs. But if you're more of a primitive type camper, which I am not, and I applaud anyone who does that, because, there have primitive campsites near Burns Lake, so be sure to pick the campsite that best suits your needs or your abilities. Now, you can visit Big Cypress National Preserve off the Tamiami Trail in Okeechobee, Florida. If Okeechobee sounds familiar, it's because that's home to the smallest post office in Florida, as well as the swamp ape, who apparently could possibly live in this preserve. You can enter through one of the 3 entrances off Tamiami, and the park is open year-round for visitors, and there is no fee to enter it, only fees if you want to do camping and other activities. Of course, hiking and camping permits are required. The Nathaniel P. Reed Visitor Center is open from 9 to 4:30 daily with closures for Christmas. The other visitor center, the Oasis Visitor Center, is only open on the weekends, but they do have a visitor center store. So, be prepared when you come to visit. If you're going to go camping, if you're going to go hiking, if you're going to do any of those things that are taking more than a couple hours, I would say, and it's hot outside, bring water, bring food. Be prepared to understand that there is wildlife. You could encounter anything from an adorable squirrel to a massive black bear. So, don't feed the wildlife. Don't leave your food out. Keep your pets close. It probably will rain. Wear tennis shoes. Wear good hiking shoes. These are all the things that you need to keep in mind that you could encounter while visiting this amazing preserve. And it really is amazing. The preserve and the towns nearby see many tourists throughout the year as they come to enjoy a beautiful piece of paradise in South Florida. And of course, like I said, be prepared when you go in. You'll see rain. You'll see wildlife. Or you will even spot Florida man. Granted, it could be the skunk ape, but most of the time it's still probably going to be Florida man. And today's Florida man comes to us from the town that the preserve actually calls home, Okeechobee, Florida. Florida man was fleeing from police when he called 911 and asked for President Trump. He claimed that he had a deal with the then president, and this was just a whole misunderstanding. He told dispatch he was a close friend of the president, and of course, dispatch wasn't buying it. He eventually pulled over after a 7-mile car chase that started when he was found in the parking lot outside the Okeechobee post office with a bag of weed. Sir, what was in your weed? So don't be Florida man, you guys. Just if the cops are chasing you or start to chase, just pull over. If you see flashing lights, just pull over. Saves you a lot of time. Of course, keep your hands where, they can see them. I think it's really sad that you have to say that these days. But yeah, so just don't be Florida man. Thanks, guys, for listening. I hope you found a new fun place to explore. I'm going to post some really cool pictures of it on Instagram, so you can check those out. Don't forget to check out the social media sites. Post the memes on Facebook groups or pages. Invite your friends. I know that there's been a lot of new people joining the group and pages, and I really appreciate that, you guys. Also, shout out to Chapel in the Woods Cowboy Church in Vero Beach. I visited. I love you guys. That's an awesome church. If you're ever in Vero Beach, look it up. If you have a second, I really do appreciate reviews, guys. Spotify and Apple, and it really just helps to get the podcast out there to other people who can enjoy it like we do. Drink your water. Have your umbrella. Wear your sunscreen. Don't feed the alligators or Florida man. And as always, guys, that's your daily dose of sunshine.